The late afternoon sun stretched its golden fingers across the park, painting long, delicate shadows on the ground. Trees glowed warmly under the amber light, swaying gently in the breeze. Marcus Carter, a 16-year-old black teen, sat quietly on a worn wooden bench near the fountain. His thumb moved absent-mindedly across his phone screen, scrolling through notifications. Around him, the world felt serene, peaceful even. Birds chirped faintly, and the distant sound of children's laughter added a joyful undertone. This was the kind of tranquility Marcus cherished in a world that often weighed heavy on his young shoulders. But today, that peace was teetering on the edge of collapse. From the corner of his eye, Marcus noticed movement, a woman walking briskly toward him. Her blonde hair was pulled back tightly, accentuating her sharp features. Her face was taut with focus, her eyes flickering with something he couldn't quite place. Stopping just a few feet away, she gave him a fleeting glance, her expression hardening for an instant before she looked away. "I don't like the look of him," she muttered under her breath, her words quiet but cutting through the stillness like a blade. Marcus heard it. Every word. His pulse quickened as a familiar unease washed over him. He had been here before, not this park, not this bench, but this moment. The scrutiny that came uninvited, tied to nothing more than the color of his skin. She didn't know him. She didn't know his story, his struggles, or his dreams. But her gaze lingered on him, heavy and accusatory, like a judgment passed before a trial. And then suddenly she pulled out her phone. 911? "Yes, I need the police," she began, her voice steady but laced with an unmistakable edge of fear. "There's a black teenager sitting here in the park. He's been here for over an hour, and he's acting suspicious. I'm not sure what he's doing, but he's making me uncomfortable." Each word hit Marcus like a cold wave. His chest tightened, his throat constricted. He hadn't done anything. He'd just been sitting here. Quiet. Alone. But now the tranquility he'd sought was spiraling into something ugly and all too familiar. The distant wail of sirens shattered the calm, growing louder with every passing second. Marcus rose slowly from the bench, his phone still in his hand, though the screen was a blur of unread notifications. His mind raced. What now? What was going to happen this time? He knew how these situations played out. One call, one accusation, and suddenly, the ground beneath his feet felt unsteady, the world threatening to tip over into chaos. Taking a slow, deliberate breath, Marcus tried to steady his nerves. He had done nothing wrong. He knew that. But experience had taught him that knowing wasn't enough. Innocence didn't always shield you from suspicion. The squad car screeched to a halt nearby, its blue lights reflecting off the fountain's shimmering water. Marcus's chest tightened further as the officer stepped out, hand resting near his holster. The officer approached with measured steps, his expression unreadable yet cold. The woman who had made the call stood a few feet away, her body tense with an air of vindication. Her finger pointed directly at Marcus, her voice sharp. "That's him," she said, her words cutting through the air like the blade of a guillotine. "I don't know what he's up to, but he's been acting suspicious." The officer's eyes darted between Marcus and the woman, narrowing slightly as he processed the situation. His calm demeanor belied the tension simmering beneath the surface. "You got ID on you?" the officer asked, his tone level but with an undercurrent of authority that demanded compliance. Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he reached for his wallet. He knew the drill. Stay calm. Don't resist. Hand over what they ask for, and pray that's enough. As he handed his ID to the officer, his heart raced. The officer scanned the ID, his face revealing little, though Marcus could feel the judgment. "I'm going to need you to come with me," the officer said, his hand moving toward Marcus's arm. Marcus froze. A chill ran down his spine, but he didn't resist. He couldn't. He knew the rules. Don't give them a reason. Don't escalate. But his thoughts were spinning out of control. Why? Why was this happening, again? He had done everything right. He was just a kid sitting in a park. And yet here he was, treated like a criminal, reduced to a statistic in someone else's story. Marcus didn't know it yet, but someone was about to change everything. Just a kid. He hadn't done anything wrong. Is this really happening? Marcus asked himself, his thoughts racing to catch up with the surreal reality unfolding around him. The officer's grip tightened on his arm, firm and unyielding, and Marcus became acutely aware of the park around him. Whispers buzzed among onlookers, their gazes heavy and invasive, but none stepped forward. At a distance, the woman who'd made the call stood with a smug expression etched on her face, as though she already knew how this story would end. But what she didn't realize, what no one realized, was that this story was about to take an unexpected turn. Just as the officer began guiding Marcus toward the squad car, a sharp, commanding voice cut through the murmurs. "Excuse me. Is there a problem here?" The officer froze in his tracks, the words hanging heavily in the air. The woman glanced up, visibly startled, her confusion written plainly on her face. Marcus turned toward the source of the voice, his eyes widening in disbelief. Walking toward them with a calm yet determined stride was Yvonne Carter, his mother. She wasn't just approaching, she was arriving with a kind of purpose that made everyone stand at attention. Her tailored suit hugged her frame with precision, and an FBI badge swung slightly at her waist with every measured step. Her gaze was razor-sharp, locking onto the officer like a hunter sizing up their prey. The officer's grip on Marcus's arm slackened almost instantly, recognition flashing in his eyes. "Mom?" Marcus breathed, his voice trembling with a mix of relief and disbelief. Yvonne's eyes briefly flicked to her son, softening for just a moment before they refocused on the officer. Then, turning her piercing gaze to the woman, she spoke with a tone so even, so controlled, it sent shivers down Marcus's spine. "Ma'am, did you just call the police on my son?" The woman faltered, her confidence crumbling in an instant. Her mouth opened and closed as she stammered, her gaze darting between Yvonne and the officer. I thought. You thought." Yvonne's voice dropped in temperature, each word slicing through the tension like a blade. "You thought because he's black, he must be up to something? Sitting on a bench, in broad daylight, makes him suspicious? That's what you thought." The officer's face drained of color, his stance stiffening. The woman's cheeks flushed crimson as her bravado dissolved into visible discomfort. The dynamic of the entire situation had shifted, and everyone could feel it. Yvonne took a step closer to the woman, her tone as calm as it was cutting. "Next time you feel the urge to call the police on someone based on nothing but the color of their skin, I suggest you think very carefully. Because today, you made a mistake you won't forget." The woman's lips quivered as though she wanted to respond, but no words came out. There was nothing she could say to justify what she'd done. For a moment, Marcus stood rooted to the spot, his body buzzing with relief. But beneath that relief, a bitter reality settled in his chest. What if Mom hadn't been here? The thought was like a dagger. What if it had been someone else? A kid without someone to stand between them and an unjust system. Yvonne's phone buzzed, breaking the silence. Pulling it out, she glanced at the screen, her expression hardening as she took in whatever message had arrived. "We're done here," she said with finality, slipping the phone back into her pocket. Turning to the officer, she added, "Take her report and leave. Now." The officer hesitated for only a moment before nodding. He retreated toward his squad car, gesturing for the woman to follow. Her expression was a mix of humiliation and disbelief as she walked away, her shoulders slumped. As the tension dissipated, Yvonne turned to Marcus and placed a firm but gentle arm around his shoulders. "You okay?" she asked, her tone soft but laced with concern. Marcus nodded, the breath he hadn't realized he was holding finally escaping his lungs. "Yeah. Thanks, Mom." The two of them walked toward their car, leaving the chaos behind. Yet, as they did, Marcus couldn't shake the weight of everything that had just happened. It wasn't just a moment of protection, it was a glaring reminder of the world they lived in. "Next time," Yvonne said with a faint smile as they reached the car, "we stay away from that park, okay?" Marcus chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Deal." But as they drove away, Marcus couldn't help but think about what had just transpired. What if it hadn't been his mom? What if the officer hadn't recognized her badge? What if, Things had escalated. The questions gnawed at him, sparking an ache deep in his chest. This time, he'd been lucky. But how many others weren't? How many more kids like him were left to face these situations alone? It wasn't just a question of safety, it was a question of justice, of humanity. How many times would fear and prejudice dictate someone's fate simply because of the color of their skin? It could have been anyone. It could have been you. What would you have done in Marcus's shoes? Or in Yvonne's? We want to hear your voice. Share your thoughts in the comments below. How does this story make you feel? Do you believe we can change the narrative? If this resonated with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Together, we can amplify these conversations and spark the change our world so desperately needs. Let's keep talking because awareness is where it all begins.